So one example of the kind of conservative solution that we need today relates to a pretty old problem, something that I describe as the parent tax penalty, meaning the fact that today's working parents are forced to contribute to our senior entitlement programs not just once but twice. They're essentially taxed twice, once when they pay their taxes and a second time as they incur the substantial costs associated with rearing children. Both of those are absolutely indispensable toward maintaining the sustainability of our senior entitlement programs. Both of them involve a whole lot of money, and we need to do what we can to offset this parent tax penalty. So I've introduced legislation to do precisely that, and that would also simultaneously get rid of the marriage tax penalty.
You also consider, I guess, what you might call a dwindling quality of life situation as another problem facing the middle class, transportation issues, what have you. Could you tell us your thoughts on that?
Sure. You know, a lot of today's working parents face a real burden when it comes to figuring out where to live. They can choose to live in a place that is close to work, but they're going to pay a whole lot more money for it, or they can choose a place that is farther away from their work site. That's more affordable, but that's going to force them to remain stuck in gridlock traffic for hours and hours each week. And I think a lot of this relates to a lack of infrastructure, a lack of access to neighborhoods that could otherwise serve as an affordable landing spot for a lot of today's working families. A lot of the reason why we don't have enough infrastructure relates to the fact that too much of our infrastructure dollars are being routed through Washington and being run through Washington's filter and being sent back to the states with a huge pile of regulations attached to them. All of this makes it far more difficult, time-consuming, and expensive to build the roads and the other basic transportation infrastructure components that we need. And if we reduced the federal tax on gasoline and allowed states to increase their tax on gasoline to a corresponding degree, you'd allow that infrastructure money to remain where it's ultimately going to be spent anyway, which is with the states. But they could do more with less money that way. That would ultimately benefit American families who would find it easier to find affordable housing if we had access to more transportation corridors. There is a lot of agreement that we need to expand infrastructure. The problem here in Washington is that too many people, sometimes people in both parties, want to centralize more and more of our spending in Washington. We think that Washington knows best, and that's the kind of mindset that we've got to get away from. But we've got to remember, this really is not an idea that is either distinctively Republican or distinctively Democratic. It's simply American, the idea that the money ought to stay where it's going to be spent in the first place.
Why do you think conservatives have an unfair reputation for not caring about the poor?
Well, first of all, we've been unfairly branded by the left as being simply about getting government out of the way so that big corporations can become bigger and more wealthy. And as that brand has been placed upon us unfairly, we have not done as good of a job as we perhaps should have at refuting it, at pointing out that quite the opposite is true, that we are conservatives not in spite of our compassion for the poor and for the middle class, but because of it. Because properly understood, compassion for the poor and the middle class compels us, it draws us in the direction of conservative government. It draws us in the direction of government having as its first and most important job the lifting of artificial barriers, especially those barriers imposed by the government itself that are impeding the economic progress of the poor and the middle class.
And such as, what would those be, those barriers?
Well, the parent tax penalty would be one of the many barriers that I'm referring to. So today's hardworking American moms and dads are forced to pay twice into our senior entitlement programs. Once when they pay their taxes, a second time as they incur the substantial costs of rearing their children. And today's tax code doesn't adequately offset that, doesn't even begin to adequately offset that penalty. Another example would, of how we can lift those barriers would be my HERO Act proposal, this higher education reform proposal that has as its aim expanding the number of institutions that are available to participate in our higher education programs at the federal level. providing more suppliers for the higher education experience in the marketplace so that more people can afford a higher education experience. And as more people have access to higher education, more people will find themselves being able to climb that economic ladder.
Why does the breakdown of the family hurt the economy so badly?
Well, the family is the fundamental unit of society, not only socially but also economically. It's within the family, within the home, that the most important education takes place. That children do their homework and are taught by their parents to follow up on assignments that they've been given in school. It's within the home that children are encouraged to set and achieve goals. And so when the family breaks down, those things can't happen. And people find themselves more and more at the mercy of the state, more and more at the mercy of the harsh realities of our economy, where they don't have the protection of the family or the training experience that they need to receive from within the family.